In a season 2 episode of The Good Place, a Netflix show, which takes a farcical but somewhat powerful look at what it means to live a good life, the two of the main characters, Michael and Janet, are trying to find someone living an exemplary good life. Now, Michael is a demon in recovery, sort of, allied with our universalist idea that all can be saved. And Janet is adamant that she is not a robot, though periodically she is rebooted, which is a little confusing. So Michael and Janet go to visit with Doug, and Doug is a man who is trying to live exactly right because he got a hint when he was a very young man that there will be points taken, and if you have the right number of points, you're going to the good place, and if you have the wrong number of points, you're going to that place that our universalist ancestors said we shouldn't believe in, that place. So he's trying so hard to be good. He lives on a diet of radishes and lentils, which he grows himself. He rescues every stray dog or wolf that comes onto his property for decades and decades. And as the visit progresses, he turns to his guests and he says, "Do you need another glass of water or perhaps a kidney?" He's trying very hard to sacrifice. Now, some of you, when you saw the title in the list of services upcoming, you might have thought, what is wrong with that minister? Why are we talking about sacrifice? Isn't that a term that we have dispelled, gotten rid of, and debunked long ago? Many times, we know, people have been asked to sacrifice in that way, ways that are not healthy, ways that are not good. And yet I think that right now, in the time in which we're living, this idea of sacrifice is something we may need to revisit. I'm going to give a very small example from my own experience, which is that last Saturday night, I sacrificed a bit of my dignity for a good cause at the Bid for Love event. Some of you were there. And I knew, actually, a couple days before that it was not a good idea for me to sing because my asthma had been severely triggered by the smoke, which we had all been living in for weeks and weeks. I thought about arranging something else, but quite frankly, I was too busy doing other things, and I didn't have the time to make that effort. So I got up and tried it, and, well, for some of you I know because you told me it was a sacrifice to hear me. And I will say that my songwriter since age 11 self was not all that pleased with that experience. But it happened, and perhaps it was not a bad thing. Now, the word sacrifice, as Mark said, comes from the same root as the word sacred, and specifically, it means to perform a sacred act. And I think that's very important when we think about what things we may want to give, even if they have a cost to ourselves, and what things we do not want to give. This week in our nation, we will observe Veterans Day, and it is also a week in which we will hear and partake in the ongoing debate about our nation and our larger society. And we will all, in our own lives, face choices about times where we have to decide whether we're going to give of our life energy or whether we aren't. I think this is important. The truth is that not all sacrifice is bad. If it were, parents would leave their children to eat cereal for every meal and just go out to the movies and garden. Volunteers such as Melissa would just say no because it complicates her Sunday afternoon schedule. Or people like Mika, who's made a beautiful Share Your Christmas tree that you'll see when you go into the Borton Hall, would not have put that kind of effort into what she does. People would just keep buying stuff rather than contributing to causes and charities, and advocates for a more just world would not pay the cost of taking positions before they are socially acceptable and when they may be vilified. People who are encouraged to hide their core identities would just stay in their own little cocoons and deny the world their gifts. So sometimes sacrifice is a good thing. Here are some questions that we can ask ourselves in order to make thoughtful and value-driven choices. Is it truly for a larger good? In our nation, we have heard over these last couple weeks the words quid pro quo enough to make them almost nonsensical when we hear them. But what strikes me, and I'm saying this very, very sincerely, whatever you think of the larger political spectrum, whatever you think about impeachment, whatever you think about the larger debate, what has disturbed me the most about these conversations is the idea that many of the commentators and many of those testifying are making no difference or differentiation between national interest and a narrower self-interest. I think we do all know that nations' foreign policies tend to have arrangements that are beneficial to the nations, but people very infrequently are making the actual connection to the fact that this is about personal gain rather than national priorities. And I think that's an important thing to notice. What, in many cases, we sacrifice for may not be worth it. For example, a corporation's bottom line when we're sacrificing too many hours of our day, or the esteem of a person who is incapable of actually being in a true and authentic relationship with us, or a need to prove something to ourselves that is truthfully not worth proving. There are many ways that we can sacrifice for things that are not actually sacred, not actually things of the highest worth. At times, all of us, though, need to care enough about the something or someone that we're willing to put our bodies in front of the line of attack, either literally or figuratively, to shelter those who may not have the resources to survive without that. And there are times, we all know, when we hold our own tongue and our own truths because we know it is more important for someone else to speak theirs. There are times when we truly let our own private interests recede so that we can, in fact, honor and serve a larger public interest, a larger interest of community. There are times that even we do small things like going to a meeting or participating in a discussion, which we know is going to be tiresome, with people that we don't always agree with, but it's important to maintain relationship. Another question we can ask is who pays the price? We know that often those who are forced to put themselves in front of others to take the blow do so because they know that the costs of these kinds of sacrifices do not fall equally on all. Our veterans serving in overseas conflict have done that kind of sacrifice, but many others do it as well. Is the price tag of a certain set of actions paid disproportionately by one group of people? For example, I think it's commonly known that since the abolishment of the draft, those who bear the actual physical burden of wars are more likely to be poor, more likely to be people of color. In the recent decision more close to home to shut off power to save and reduce the risk of save property and reduce the risk of fire, one group that was affected disproportionately by those blackouts were those who were physically dependent upon power for survival and mobility, who faced a level of fear that others did not have to face. Another question we can ask is, does it ask too much of the giver? As Jim's powerful words show, sometimes we are forced to pay prices that stay with us and shape the rest of our lives. And as we observe this Veterans Day, we think about sacrifice and we think about the way many of us have to hold multiple truths around this. We can respect and honor people that we know have served in that way and sacrificed in that way because they were expected to serve and they met that expectation, or because they believe they should serve. And we can also understand that that does not mean that we agree with war as a measure, or certainly not as a first resort. And yet we cannot ignore the gifts given. So in that spirit, I would like to ask all of our veterans who are willing to rise in body or spirit at this time, and just let us know and see and honor you for a minute, if we can. Thank you. And I would also like to ask all who have lost someone in the course of war just to raise their hand for a minute, for those who have lost a loved one who have served in that capacity. I'd also like to ask our conscientious objectors to stand at this time. We had several who, yes, thank you. And let us also give them our appreciation. And I would ask those who have served by their side and supported them to raise a hand for a moment as well. We too often overlook the sacrifices made by those who are conscientious objectors, who sacrificed in many cases the good regard of their neighbors and colleagues, their friends, even the families, who, because of their choice to take a stand consistent with their values. So I think it's important for us, particularly with the history of the Peace Center in this congregation, to think about those sacrifices as well. Those who act upon their ethics before there is a common consensus that they should do so lose community, money, and health as well. Whether we are committed to nonviolence, which is part of the special legacy of this congregation, or whether we believe war to be a necessary evil, most of us would work for a world without war, for it is clear that the cost of one life lost or damaged is incalculable. These examples remind us that sometimes we are asked to give in ways that are unsustainable. Some years back, our youth once parodied Shel Silverstein's classic book, The Giving Tree, in which a tree continues to give and give. First it gives of its leaves, and then it gives of its branches, then it gives of its core limbs until it's nothing, and then its trunk until it's nothing but a stump. And our wise youth pointed out that we should not be encouraging people to set that as the model of giving. We don't want people to take all of their vital life energy, and yet it is also true that we cannot live in a world in which we never do anything uncomfortable, unpleasant, or out of our own interest. Sacrifice in a religious sense has a very complicated history. We know that there are people and certain groups that have sacrificed to let us be here today. So a final question that we should ask is, what will the sacrifice achieve? The thing is, we often do not know. The most painful thing is to realize that the cost we bear may be for nothing, or perhaps we will not know in our lifetime. So many, including suffragette Susan B. Anthony, civil rights leaders Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., gay activist Harry Milk, all died without knowing what their efforts achieved. Our Unitarian ancestor Theodore Parker was among one of those. He fought against the fugitive slave laws, which allowed professional slave catchers to go into the homes of freed slaves and bring them back to their former masters. And he talked about that and was part of a secret committee of 6 who funded John Brown's raid at Brown's Ferry in 1859, even though he did not have much money himself. At the time when the vast majority of white society was trying to ignore and look the other way around the moral and ethical issues of slavery, Parker was part of an effort to force change, even though he and the other funders did not know the full extent of Brown's plan at that time. He died in Europe as someone who was cast out by his friends and family, not knowing what his actions would bring. There are many kinds of sacrifice that I think we need to recommit to, and other kinds that we should be done with forever. This is the nature of our community together, that we have to continue to ask these questions. And as for me, I have decided upon thinking about this for all week that I'm okay with my decision to sing badly for a good cause. I do want to go on record that that whole dunk tank idea is totally out for me. It comes up with a disturbing regularity, but I'm not doing it. But I will support that amazing team that put on our bid for love and be a little part of raising money, even though, I think now I will stick to songwriting and belting out hymns, have a voice. So that'll be my new approach. What I also know from thinking about this deeply for many, many weeks is that we need a world in which we can act from our deepest commitments, and a world in which one of those deepest commitments is to the fullness of our own being, where we remember that we're part of that spider web of life, and also part of what has worth and dignity. We need to reap the benefits, and we do reap the benefits of those who have sacrificed for us, and we need to leave something behind for those who will come after us. In this way, we weave together the strands of the sacred. Blessed be.